What's up, friends, family, and future MDs? It's me, Alicia, and I just want to thank you so much for joining me for another episode of AD's RX for MD. If you haven't done so already, you already know what to do. Go down there and hit that subscribe button as well as the bell icon so you can receive notifications every single time I post. So I just finished up a series on the AMCAS application, including the timeline, steps that I took to stay on track, to write my personal statement, as well as how I prepared for my interviews. But today we are going to be getting into a new topic and going back to the pre-med side of things. And I want to discuss with you guys some of the activities and extracurriculars you can be involved in as a pre-med to help build up your resume. So let's get into the video. First, I want to talk about just some general conceptual tips to keep in mind when you are approaching some of the activities that you want to do. So for one, find activities that you enjoy and try to merge them with something science or medicine related. So if you like teaching, you can try tutoring, maybe tutoring high school science and math, or even tutoring at your university. You could also be involved in after-school programs. If you're someone who likes outdoors, for example, you can work at a summer camp. Or the way you can bring those two together is you can work at a summer camp that's dedicated towards kids that are interested in science. The next thing is don't feel like you have to cram too many activities into 1 year because that can get very overwhelming and stressful. For me, I focused on 1 to 3 things per school year and semester, and that was more than enough for me. And so one thing that I did was I looked at 4 to 8 things that I knew I wanted to accomplish over the course of my undergraduate experience. And then I just scheduled each one, what summer I was gonna do it, or at least pursue it, which school year I was gonna do each thing, and that helped me stay on track. It helped me to cut down the time searching for opportunities and figuring out what I wanted to do, because a lot of times for, say, research opportunities or other internships, there's a whole application process and you have to be early in that process. So you don't want to spend all that time figuring out, well, what do I want to do this year, because you might miss deadlines. Last thing you want to keep in mind is that if you want to go to med school immediately after you graduate, your senior year activities are not going to be on your AMCAS application because you have to apply your junior year. Now, there are a lot of schools that allow you to send updates, so as you complete those activities, you can let them know, but then there are some schools that don't allow you to send updates. So you should probably look into which schools will and will not allow you to send updates. If you have a lot of schools that you're applying to that don't accept updates, try to look at the activities that you have planned and see which one is the lowest priority to put on your application, and you can schedule that for the senior year. So let's get into volunteering, shadowing, clinical experience, all of that. The first thing we're going to talk about is volunteering. How much volunteering should you do? You guys are going to hear this a lot on my channel, but it depends on your circumstances. Now, you don't have to approach volunteering as though you need to just rack up the hours, 200, 500, 1,000 hours. The way I approach volunteering was just that it's always been a part of my life. It's always been something that I seek out. I didn't even worry about hours. I just, every school year, as something became available and something was advertised, if I was interested in it, I would sign up for it. And so that's really how I approach volunteering. And my volunteering history goes even beyond just my college years, so I was able to include some of those experiences as well on my application. What types of activities should you do? So a lot of people think they should only do clinical volunteering. Honestly, it's really good to be well-rounded. So clinical volunteering definitely can't hurt, but if there are other opportunities in other areas, those are gonna look just as good on a resume, and they're also gonna show that you have varied interests. Now let's talk about shadowing. How much shadowing should you do? Let's say it all together. It depends on your circumstances. But there are a lot of people who think if they have any less than 500 hours, they're not even gonna be considered by med schools, and that's definitely not true. You want to show that you have spent a lot of time with physicians, and if possible, different disciplines is good. I personally did 150 shadowing hours. I just dedicated one summer to shadowing 3 different disciplines, and I spent a week or more with each discipline. So that was more than enough for me. And honestly, there are a lot more med students out there who have done less than 500 hours of shadowing than you think. So why should you shadow? Shadowing shows admissions committees, number one, that you are really interested in medicine, because when you shadow, you have to do that during your free time. It also shows that you have seen some of the ins and outs of medicine and you're still interested. It's really easy to want to be a doctor when you see like TV shows that kind of glamorize things and make it look like the most exciting thing in the world. But when you've actually been with a doctor and seen the good and the bad and you still want to do it, that's really comforting to admissions committees. Now let's talk about clinical experiences. So honestly, being involved in clinical work or volunteering is not as common as you'd think. When I was looking at a lot of these schools that I want to apply to, there is this thing called the MSAR, Medical School Admissions Requirements. And on there you can find so many helpful stats on applicants and matriculants to every single school. And so they have graphs on there that show what percentage of matriculants participated in, say, research or volunteering, shadowing, clinical experience. For most of those categories, usually anywhere between 70 to 90% of the applicants have done them. But for clinical experience, at least right now, it's usually between 25 to 40%. And so what that means is if you can cover the bases in all these other areas and have clinical experience under your belt, you are distinguishing yourself in a much smaller percentage of that applicant pool of people who have sort of an extra experience that a lot of other applicants don't have. So, what types of clinical experiences can you do? Well, the easiest one would be just volunteering in a clinical setting, a hospital or a private practice, and asking if you can really be a little bit more involved than you would if you were just kind of standing back and watching. The one that I chose to do was medical scribing. This would be like the next tier up from volunteering because it is a program that you have to be trained for, but the program is not that long. The training is maybe 3 weeks at most for learning all of the terminology. Now, you will probably have to go through orientations at whatever hospital or wherever you are assigned, but it wasn't bad. It's not like you have to invest 2 years into training and then you can finally work. The other things that you can do that do take a little bit more training are medical assistant. The benefit of that is you get to be a little bit more involved in the patient care. You have a limited amount of activities that you can do where you can actually have hands-on experience with the patients, as opposed to where you're a scribe. You are definitely right there in the middle of the action, but you're just doing the documentation. Some people, more non-traditional students, will actually work as an EMT for a little while. That's another way to get a lot of really hands-on experience and learn some of the terminology and things that you're going to start seeing in med school. Why should you have clinical experience? So I talked about this kind of at the beginning of this section, but basically distinguishing yourself based on those stats. The more you can make yourself stand out and look like someone who has something that fewer of the applicants has, you are really going to be unique and you are going to be a standout, and admissions committees are going to say, wow, this person has done a lot and they've been in a clinical setting. Let's look into this application. Now let's talk about research. When should you do research? So a lot of pre-med students will do a research project at their school lasting maybe an entire school year, or they may do summer research lasting a summer, or they can kind of merge the two. Like if your school has research projects that will continue into the summer, you can get like a year plus a summer worth of research. Personally, I did a research project for one of my classes. And then, because I loved it so much, I decided to go ahead and pursue an internship for the following summer. So I did a summer's worth of research, and then I had a class where I had to do a research project, which is a little different. Why should you do research? So conducting research shows admissions committees that you have critical thinking skills, that you can work in a team. It gives them insight into your work ethic. And it's also really good to have a letter of recommendation from someone outside of your institution to also speak to what type of person you are in a professional setting with them. Now, the very last category is the leadership/extracurricular activities. A lot of times these are going to overlap with things that you have done in the other categories, but sometimes they're just extra experiences. If you're able to double dip and do something that is applicable to medicine, that's like perfect, golden. But honestly, don't get too caught up in doing things to boost your science resume. Allow this category to be things that you truly enjoy, because it's not good to get too caught up in meeting all these deadlines and being obsessed with being the perfect pre-med and then come out of undergrad and just be tired, worn down, having done nothing that you actually enjoyed. My second year is when I decided to be a pre-med student, and still I didn't want to do too much because it was just an adjustment, but I was a resident assistant that year, and this can be one of those leadership/extracurricular activities. What did I gain from being a resident assistant? Well, definitely organization, time management, because it was a big job. I, of course, got a lot of leadership experience, people skills, management, people management, impression management. The summer of my second year in undergrad, I actually had to take summer biology because I had to kind of catch up on the curriculum. So this wasn't really anything that could boost my resume. It was just kind of checking a box of completing a class. So to be honest, I would say those first 2 years didn't really contribute much to my resume, with the exception of the resident assistant job. So really, it was 3 years in which I was able to do all of the activities that I did. So my third year is when I decided to be a student mentor. Again, this is not necessarily directly science related, but it was a volunteer opportunity, and it was something that lasted the entire year. The summer of my third year was when I decided to do an internship. So I did research on triple negative breast cancer cells, and that was a really great project that I was part of, and that was it for my research. My fourth year, I decided to work as an OChem lab TA. In addition, I was a part of volunteer experiences on my campus, where we had like an annual college fair where each department would have students represent the department and talk to local high school students that would come to the campus just to learn more about the different majors that they could study, to talk to some of the current students. And so I did that, and I represented the Department of Biochemistry, so that was also science related, but also a volunteer experience. Now, the summer after my fourth year, I earned the certification to work as a medical scribe, totally independent of any other companies. That didn't work out as well as like an independent employee, but once I connected with Scribe America, that's when I was able to be employed later on. But I still just earned that credential. And then I also spent that summer shadowing 3 different disciplines. My fifth year, my super senior year, I was still a science related TA. I would help with running a lot of the lab tests. I also participated in that volunteer opportunity that I mentioned earlier, talking with the high school students in the area. And then the summer after my super senior year, which is when I came home due to COVID, that is when I started working as a medical scribe with Scribe America. So even that opportunity, while I would say it's good to try to aim for a year of clinical experience, if you don't have a year's worth, you still are going to be a pretty competitive applicant if you have really taken the time to make sure you hit all these different categories. Some of the extra things that I did on campus were I was in choir, I was a section leader in my choir, I was a prayer warrior, I was a club officer, and those were just things that I kind of enjoyed and did. And so adding all the things that I did during undergrad up on my resume, it was definitely really, really, really dynamic. So those are the tips that I have for you. Those are the areas in which I recommend you get at least one experience. If there is anything else you want to know, any questions you have, go ahead and leave them down below. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share, and I will see you in the next video.